Well, hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be interviewing Dad a little bit to kind of dig a bit deeper into some of the theme of our virtual fusion event, which is stewarding your core personal materials. So let's start right there. Dad, I know as we've been sort of talking and debriefing a bit in preparation for this process, let's talk a little bit about the language that we're even using. Yeah. Stewarding your core personal material, that's actually the result of some refining and some previous discussion. Talk a little bit about that language. What does it imply? And as a starting point for us, why is it important to think about that?
Yeah, well, I think the language is critical because without even being aware of it, the use of the wrong language or unhelpful language very quickly can begin to shut us down or really limit or narrow what we kind of subconsciously or intuitively begin to do when we engage this topic. So actually it was very helpful at the GDI leadership retreat to have a great group conversation around this question, and the outcome of that process was this specific languaging, your personal core material, being what we're talking about, versus, for instance, not using the word messaging, even though there's a dimension of message and messaging involved in what we're talking about here. But our sense has been that, and my sense very much as I've interacted with people, when you say, so what's your core life message, or what, even if you make it plural, messages, that kind of has this sense of like, there is a message that I must carry and must get right, and I have only one major one or something like that. Either that, or we tend to think in terms of people with like a platform ministry, preachers or speakers or writers, communicators, as people who have messages, and a lot of people will end up saying in that kind of conversation, well, I don't really have a message, like, Jose Gonzalez has a message, that's why he runs around, Latin America delivering his message, but I'm just, me here and wherever. And so recognizing that we're really not talking about that kind of message in that way, even though those kind of messages are part of the larger horizon, the larger kind of terrain that we're talking about here. We're literally talking, that which has been given to us and that which has been formed in us, that which has been entrusted to us, that in some way, going back to the John 17 discussion, that in some way we have been given by God and are now being asked, invited, expected in kingdom terms to give to other people that which is inside of us. So it's not, it includes messaging, but it's a much larger thing. It was jokingly, people said, we're really talking about your stuff. What's your stuff? What's my stuff? What's your stuff? I have some stuff that's been given to me, and we could have called this, stewarding your core stuff. That didn't sound quite noble enough for a webinar. So stewarding your core material, even that tends to be, depending on how people hear it, can be limiting. So I just want to recognize the limitations of the language that we're using, and the limitations of any language that we might choose in some way could easily become narrow or leave some people out or get people feeling like it doesn't apply to them. So just to say, what we're really talking about here is a much, as we'll see here, it's much more organic. It's more about who we are, what's been formed in us, and then how we steward that in the course of our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really, really good. So it's personal because it's unique to us. It's reflective of who we are. It's core because it's intrinsic and central to our identity. It's an identity-based thing.
Yes.
And we're talking about it as being material because we're, like you said, we're talking about the things, the individual kind of broken down bits and pieces content. And I just wanted to add to that one of the things that came out of the discussion at the GDI board retreat that I thought was so helpful, and one of the things that we're going to try and do a fair amount of here throughout the rest of the virtual fusion event, is trying to give some specific examples of what this actually has looked like for different types of people. Because as soon as you start talking about that, all of a sudden it gets a lot less vague and mystical, and it gets a lot more concrete of, oh, that's what we mean by material. That person's unique and profound insight into this aspect of what makes life go well for you. And we'll talk more about this as we keep going. What does it actually look like? But I think it's important to name, when we say material, we don't necessarily mean, video series or 3-part book series or PowerPoint slide. We're talking about the actual refined insights and paradigms and whatnot that come out of your life experience.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about this format, if we were doing a live fusion, we would have a live discussion, people sitting around interacting around this. I'm excited about the virtual fusion model and this platform enabling us to have this as a conversation so that we can we need to kind of suss this out as a community. We need to figure it out, talk about it, try it on for size, find, maybe there's other language that will emerge in this process that will be helpful to everyone. Or some ways that we can identify that here's where we start to lose the right focus, and it'll come out of our group interaction. So I'm really glad that we're going to have this interactive time.
Yeah, that's great. So we've identified that getting hung up on the language or being confused about the language of what we're talking about can be one of the obstacles that gets in the way, and this often will be, it might express itself through reacting to the way that somebody else describes their own process. There's any number of ways that language itself can become an obstacle to our own identification and then stewardship of our personal core material. Right. So talk a little bit about some of the other obstacles. What are other things that can get in the way, that can sort of confuse us, get us off track? Variations on that question of obstacles that hinder the process of distilling our personal core material.
Yeah, well, I think at a very fundamental level, we need to start all the way down at the level of, I guess what I would just call belief, of our conviction, our belief, it's a matter of faith, really. Do I have the stuff, whatever language we're using here, does it apply to me, and do I have it? Is it in me? Do I carry this, and do I really have a stewardship of something? Maybe I've never even thought about it, so that might be a little scary. Or even if I have thought about it, maybe I've thought about it and I don't really, I'm not getting any handles or something. So the question of, do I really have core material, which is, of course, one of the questions that people have been, participants have already been blogging about, reflecting on, which I'm glad we started on that note. It'll be great to hear some of the participants' thinking and interaction around this theme. But just a couple thoughts about that. I think it's important to think about this belief question really as an extension of the many of the folks on this in this webinar, I'm sure, have been through DDQ, for instance, and the Destiny Discovery Quest process. And one of the things that we work on right up front, if you recall, in that process, we look at Psalm 139 and talk about, kind of just a personal heart encounter with the question, do I really believe that I am fearfully and wonderfully made? That I have been in the heart, in the mind, and the thoughts of God, and His thoughts towards me are amazing. And I personally am fearfully and wonderfully made, and my heart knows it right well, that kind of thing. And so we wrestle with that in the beginning of the DDQ process, because identifying where there might be, that conviction can take some hits. If we ever had it, can take some hits along the way when life doesn't work the way we expect, or is brutal at points, or whatever. So coming back to a place of fresh discovery, yes, I really am fearfully and wonderfully made. Embracing that as a reality, and it's a statement of Scripture, and it's also just a reality of my life, and I'm living from that platform. That's a huge part of coming to the point where we're proactively living towards our purpose, discovering our design, and so forth. Well, the extension of that over time, once I settle this question of, am I fearfully and wonderfully made, the extension of that then becomes, if I am fearfully and wonderfully made, notice that's being language. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and God has these thoughts for me that are about who I am and what my life will be about. And in the New Testament, we start hearing language about, being created for good works that have been prepared for us beforehand, and that kind of a notion of intentionality and design, and God expressing Himself through us in particular ways that are going to bring particular fruit and outcomes that are going to bring Him glory and reflect who He is on planet Earth. So the fearfully and wonderfully made question goes right to the question of core material and core content, because it's basically saying, if I really am fearfully and wonderfully made, then out of that place of identity and clarity and embrace of the purposes of God in my life, then I begin to live out of that, and that biblically and theologically inevitably moves into, I will bear fruit. I will bear a certain kind of fruit because I am made a certain way. and that genetic makeup, whatever kind of a fruit bearer I am, the New Testament is just shot full of that kind of fruit language. Jesus loved it. Jesus talked a lot about us in terms of being a vineyard or a vine that's being pruned and going and bearing fruit. And Paul picked it up and used it in various ways. So the notion that we are all fruit bearers, we all created to be fruit bearers, and that as fruit bearers, there are certain ways that God works with us and prunes us and waters us and fertilizes us and cultivates us so that we bear good fruit and lasting fruit. That's all goes to this notion of core material. So the kind of this fundamental issue of conviction: do I really believe that I am called as one of those people who will have core material that God intends to do something with? I think it goes to the passage. Obviously, I've been referencing John 15 and some of the things I've just been saying here. The passage, of course, opens up with the whole concept of abiding in the vine, and if you don't abide in me, you can't bear much fruit. By the converse of that is also true. As you abide in me, you do bear much fruit. And then he goes into this interesting and powerful conversation about the connection between love and being in relationship with the Father and being in relationship with the brethren. Then comes down to this amazing statement in verse 16 of John 15, where he says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit." I chose you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, and that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. So even there's this kind of this statement from God's perspective. He wanted to be really clear. Just like he came and sought us and found us, he also then chose us and called us that we would go and bear fruit. So recognizing that as a statement of reality, then that kind of raises the stewardship bar. He chose me, he called me, and I am, as a child of God, I am by default, de facto, I am a fruit bearer who now has been called to bear fruit, and he intends for me to bear fruit that will remain or bear lasting fruit, which we'll talk more about that. But I think that basic notion of this is a matter of belief and conviction, and it's even a matter of obedience. If you really listen to the language of this passage, it's also a matter of obedience. We have, in fact, been called and chosen by him to go and bear fruit. And if we're accepting all of the other segments of this passage as applying to all believers, which of course we do, about loving one another and abiding in the vine and all these other passages, then this one verse about him calling us to be fruit bearers that he will prune and work with so that we will bear lasting fruit is also true of every one of us. So that's a conviction that we need to grow in and somehow, I think, do business with God on, in terms of the notion that this now becomes a matter of stewardship, about asking the question, what kind of fruit am I called to bear, and then how do I bear that good fruit? How do I bear fruit that will remain?
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really good. I find that really encouraging, actually, to think about that. That's sort of the central obstacle, because to me, one of the, well, not just to me, I think this is fairly biblically carried out, that one of the central functions of the Holy Spirit is to actually give us belief that we lack.
Yes.
When we need it.
The gift of faith.
The gift, right, precisely. And that's actually one of the sort of the touchstones of our own walk, is that sometimes there's literally points where we're clear that the hindrance we have is that we don't yet believe something, we don't have faith for something.
Yes.
Like you naming that one of the main and really the biggest fundamental obstacle to this process actually begins with what you're really saying is it's about what, identity in Christ, identity in the Father. It's again, it comes back to that core essential, yes. Who am I in God? It brings us right back to that question, but I find that very encouraging, because then that means there is something proactive that I can do. Mm-hmm. I can engage the Holy Spirit and ask him to strengthen that which is currently weak in me. Like if I recognize that, oh man, Doug is saying this and I give mental assent to it, but in practice I have issue. I don't really know if I actually feel like you put yourself in that Moses
right
mode. Well, right. God's calling me to this thing, but I'm really bad at public speaking, and I don't really think I buy this.
Right.
God is so gracious at providing us that, hey, you know what? It'll be okay. Here's some faith. Like you can take the next step in this.
Yeah.
So recognizing that as sort of the bedrock obstacle to me is very encouraging.
I think the other things that should be encouraging to us about all of this, in terms of even just the language and the paradigms that Jesus is using here, these are organic models, organic illustrations. So he doesn't say, I called you that you might come and become my disciple and develop a skill set and go do amazing tasks.
Be a cog in my machine.
And then go accomplish amazing stuff. Now bearing fruit encompasses those things, but at its core, this is an organic paradigm, which means you need to discover what kind of fruit-bearing tree or shrub you are, and then let him prune you and do the things in you that will enable what is actually a natural, organic expression of your identity.
Yeah.
Come forth in a way that then will bear fruit. Because, I mean, what kind of a tree or what kind of a vine wouldn't bear grapes? What kind of an apple tree wouldn't bear apples? What kind of a wheat field wouldn't grow wheat? So it's a matter of this organic reality expressing itself, which takes a little bit of we tend to switch so quickly over into performance mode.
Right.
I need to now go and do the thing, go fulfill my mission. And that's true in a broad sense, but at a fundamental level, what I really need to do is I need to go be fully unleashed expression of who God has called me and wired me, designed me to be, and then discover what kind of fruit he's pruning me, and he's cultivating me, and he's working in me to bear, which is an expression of the flow of his life in me, because I'm abiding in him, it's a different feel than well, my life purpose is to go and accomplish tasks, which again, yes, we'll accomplish some tasks, but it should take some pressure off if we realize we're living into something that he designed us for beforehand that will express a dimension of his character through our lives.
It's almost like you're saying we're supposed to seek first the kingdom and these other things will be added after it.
Almost.
That's really great.
But one other thing I want to say is that the other component of that, what it calls for is, as I come to believe this, then it calls for intentionality and obedience. Of course, this passage in John 15 is full of that. My word abide in you, obey my commandments, love one another, lay your life down for one another, and then these things this is how it will play out in the community of faith, and then you'll ask from me what you will, and it shall be done for you. So even the way he brackets the conversation here with asking for what you will, and the Father will do it right on the tail end of it, and your fruit should remain, and that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. Well, if this is an expression of who we are, and we're growing in this intentionality of stewarding and bringing our lives before him and saying, I want to live my life in a way that's fruitful, what kind of things, right in that flow of that thought now, what kind of things am I going to tend to ask for? I'm going to tend to ask for I'm going to ask for that which I see, which is on my heart, that which I'm passionate about, the things that concern me and that draw my attention and move my heart are the things that I'm going to be asking the Father for as I am bearing fruit that remains at the beginning of that passage. So again, it's an expression of faith being activated and embracing an identity in God and a conviction that he's put things in me, that he has formed things in me that are supposed to bring forth lasting fruitfulness. And in that process, then my call is to become a steward that exercises faith and intentionality in response to that, which means that coasting our way into this is not how it's not going to play.
Yeah.
The way it's going to play out.
That's actually that you've mentioned a few different times the sort of the implication of needing to be more intentional. So let's move past the belief bit as sort of one of the potential obstacles. Yes. It sounds like sort of a lack of intentionality or a carelessness about the process might be another one. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So again, exactly like you said, it moves us right into a big obstacle being. You could say casualness, but I would even say passivity or a carelessness, a disregard for, or not even a recognizing. This is a mandate. It is a stewardship mandate that requires a response of obedience. So, identifying, going down in my mind, the list of obstacles to to all this happening. Number one is the issue of faith and conviction, but right behind it then becomes the one of disobedience through lack of attention. Inattentiveness or carelessness becomes like obstacle number two, because I can coast my way through the years of my life without ever really asking the question, what have I been entrusted with? And then who am I to give it to, and how am I to give it? Those are things that take a lot of work. And I think we intuit that is true, which can very much lead to like, well, okay, if God wants to do it in me, he'll do it, which of course is not, I don't think is an accurate perception of how this happens in our lives.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot to say about that obstacle, except that it's huge. Lack of intentionality, lack of recognizing the commandment aspect of this thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's essential, like you said. Otherwise it's sort of left up to the flow of least resistance, and we all know kind of how far that tends to get us with valuable processes.
Yeah.
Good.
Almost like we need a community around us helping us think about these things and become more intentional and more focused and leaning in together.
Yeah. What are some other obstacles? We've thought about a few more.
Another one that I would name is what I just have come to call the sin of familiarity. I think one of the biggest obstacles, that even as we were interacting at the GDI retreat last month, as people were interacting with us personally, this sense that I am so close to me, I'm so close to who I am, that I just like it's easy to not value or not honor somebody who's real close to us that we are around all the time, a family member or somebody, our buddy, in terms of the things of God, the things that are in them. We do that even worse with ourselves. We commit the sin of familiarity with ourselves all the time, in the sense that I see myself, and so it's really hard for me to stop and really say, wow, I'm carrying things. These are valuable. These are important. God intends for me to do something with these and to sow these and to share these things that he's given me. I'm reminded particularly of Lynn Burgess, who any names I mentioned, by the way, I've gotten their permission to mention them. I've been working with Lynn as she's in this. She's of course associate. I don't know what her exact title is at New Hope, associate pastor, long-term elder at New Hope in Texas, and she's in this stage of life where she's kind of sensing some transitions and wanting to steward well this season of her life. And we've met a few times over the last, actually several years now, around this theme. And one of the things she's really wrestled with, which she brought up again at the GDI retreat, is like, what do I have? I mean, like, I don't know she's too familiar with herself. She's too familiar with her stuff, so to speak. And of course, anyone who knows Lynn, anyone who's been in her life and around her, hears her say that and just laughs. It's like, what in the world are you talking about? You have all kinds of stuff, but it's hard for her to see it because she lives inside her. And so one of the things that came out as we were interacting at the retreat, that is kind of like this light dawned at one point. She's like, she identified, what can you articulate what the language? I think
the idea of second chair leadership, which I think one of the other videos is going to actually focus on a little bit.
Okay, great. So you'll be hearing from Lynn. They'll be hearing from Lynn in this conversation, but kind of like, because I have been a second chair leader throughout my ministry and life so many times, I get some things about that are really valuable to other people. And wow, maybe I should reflect on that and maybe do something with that. Now, anytime we use an illustration, I just want to quick pause and say it's always a little dangerous to do that, because now it sounds like we're only talking about people who are leaders in churches and have positions in churches. So limitation of anything that we do, but it's a good illustration of the fact that for Lynn, breaking out, and as I've been walking with her and interacting around this, breaking out of this thing of I'm so close to who I am that I don't even see what is there that is something that would have that kind of value that God would want me to do something with, has been one of the big challenges. And then her own story would illustrate also that other people, sometimes outside perspective, the input of the community is really helpful in that process. So that's another big one, which moves to the last one. I'll identify the last obstacle, which is like unto it, which is comparison. So on the one hand, we are too familiar with ourselves. On the other hand, when we begin to identify stuff, say, well, maybe there's this. And I think, well, I can see how this has been formed in my life, or this is a perspective or a value or a thing that I carry that might have some usefulness, for others. But as soon as we start identifying this stuff, then we start looking around and saying, but it doesn't look like what she has or what has, or it's not, you know, a public stage thing, or it's not a whatever, or we just, the biggest remaining obstacle then becomes just comparison. We shut down, or we become vulnerable to being shut down in the process simply by recognizing the differentness of what we carry. Of course, that's the whole point. It's unique. It's me. It's not you. It's not supposed to look like you, but the comparison thing can become the deadly element then to shut us down and keep us in the corner, which of course where the enemy would like us to be.
Yeah, that's really great. You know, just I guess in summation here, as we wrap up this talk about what some of the obstacles are, one of the things that is striking me as you're talking is that maybe the overarching obstacle, that the connection between all of these, it really has to do with our point of view, how we look at this whole process to begin with.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of times, I think it's kind of common to man, that we tend to think in terms of the categories of usefulness and meaning out there in the world that we already have formed in our minds. You know,
right?
These people who do these things, or, you know, these are the useful things that one can do, or the ways that one can be important or contribute something of value, or what have you. And so we tend to sort of look at ourselves and watch to see if we recognize things that fit into those categories.
Mm-hmm.
And either we do, and that's great, and then we put them into those categories, or we don't, and then we decide that we don't have those things. We're not one of those cool people who have something to give.
Yes.
Because it's all about the
yes.
boxes we have already pre-established for what the end point should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're just looking to see, you know, red light, green light, do we have things that fit into those boxes?
Yes, exactly.
What you're describing is a completely counter-indicated approach to that, where you say, what is in me?
Mm-hmm.
And if I start from the presupposition that I was made intentionally, then if it is in me, it has purpose, it has meaning. Once
yes.
I recognize that it is in me, then I must ask the question, what am I to do with this?
Yes.
But it's in me. I see it now in a fresh way, and that requires more intentionality, like you've said. That requires external mirroring and input through a community to help you see all those things that you've said.
Yeah.
But it requires a completely reversed point of view, where we're not worried. We don't know yet what the outcomes are going
That's
to look
right.
like, what the final applications.
Right.
We don't have those boxes preset yet. We just know that if I see a thing and it's there, and I name it more, and I kind of drill into it, and I recognize, hey, this is this thing I figured out about how life works well, or what would go well in other, or this, we're going to talk.
Or this is thing I just feel really strongly about.
Right. If it's there, then I must recognize that it is in some way part of the vine that I am. Yes. And God sees it, and then I have to ask the question, what is this to lead to? Yes. Where is this to go? Yeah. Which is just, I think that's really, really critical, and really encouraging and helpful to recognize that essentially at the heart of what we're talking about in this whole video of obstacles, the obstacle is our own human nature and our own human paradigms about what is valuable and what is not valuable. Yes. And how do we figure that out?
Yes.
And
once we have the kind, we break through the place you're talking about, then bring it to a very simple place, which we can continue talking about in this whole process of what is the next step. Not what is like you said, what is the big outcome on the horizon, but what's the next step? My next stewardship step, my next step of obedience. What do I do with this thing I'm beginning to identify right now? What's the next layer in the process, so to speak?
Yep.
Kind of tuning, maybe being a little bit more practical and short term in our thinking about some of these things, rather than, well, if I do this right, then this will eventually lead to this great cosmic outcome. Literally, what do I do with what I've been given on the shorter term, as it needs to be part of our thinking and our conversation with other people?
That's great. Well, thanks, Jed. That was really helpful, really interesting, and I think is a great sort of continuing to flesh out this theme that we're diving into. Mm-hmm. Really looking forward to engaging this and the larger conversation about stewarding your core personal material with all of you throughout the rest of this day and weekend process that we have here, our virtual fusion. So make sure that you're checking back in every hour. Like we said, we're going to be continuing to post content. Every hour is going to come out. So check back in, watch the videos. When the reflection prompts come through, blog about it, take it over into the L3 space, post your blogs, and you jump into the forum. And let's actually really dive into having some of these conversations together in that space, as well as here on some of the live interactions we're going to be having. So look forward
Yes.
to hearing your
Great.
thoughts
Looking
and
forward to it.
interacting with all of you.